After receiving a job offer from my ex, I am discovering things that can take them down. Honestly, when I first received the job offer, I was beside myself with disbelief. I had been accepted to a number of places before, but turned them down as I was looking for something more suitable. When Jared's company popped up, I knew I had to apply. My ex-boyfriend Jared is the CEO of one of the leading tech companies in the country. We didn't end on the best of terms, and at the present time, our relationship is completely estranged. However, it looks like he is getting back at me because he offered me a position at the firm completely unaware of how ironic it is. I was ready to turn this opportunity down purely out of pride. The thought of being in employment of a person who broke my heart and left me to pick up the pieces was simply infuriating. Unfortunately for me, my predicament was in dire need of a job given my current financial state, and this came with a very decent salary. So in the end, I sucked it up and accepted the offer like a hypocrite. The atmosphere was on edge on the first day of work, and I almost did not make it to the office. After a long time, I had to meet Jared, and my emotions started to rush in. My breakup with him lingered on my mind. Jared seemed more put together than before, but older and polished. His eyes still held an intensity that I remembered, which made the emotions even harder to control. In an attempt to break the ice, he gave me a handshake accompanied with a smile. "It is good to have you on board, Natalie." The tension between us was noticeable. "Let us focus on the future instead. Whatever helps you cope, I will go along with." I had no option but to answer with a grin. With that, everything changed. Now, Jared was my boss and I was just another employee in the cold corporate world. It put me in a position where I simply avoided Jared and kept my focus on work. It was less painful in a way. However, the longer I worked, the more suspicious things started to seem. Jared was always ambitious, but now he was adding a hint of ruthless that he didn't previously possess. He was secretive, holding closed-door meetings and giving vague orders. Employees spoke in hushed tones about corrupt deals and dubious partnerships, but no one wanted to come forward. The company was doing well, but something about it just didn't sit right. To begin with, I was willing to let this slide. After all, it was none of my concern. I was here to complete my tasks, not to investigate his. But I had to finish a project one evening and came across something that unnerved me. While I was alone in the office finishing up my reports, I saw that Jared's office light was switched on. I gave in to my curiosity and walked over to his room, which had its door slightly ajar. I could see his computer and an email window that was opened. It was a conversation between Jared and a contact whose name was not known, where they seemed to be discussing payments and offshore accounts. I should not have done it, but curiosity got the best of me. As my heartbeat quickened, I entered his office. The emails were very explicit, depicting blatant attempts to circumvent the law. They referenced shell corporations, covert assets, and even payments to people in power. Jared was indeed up to something, and it was very illegal. I knew I was risking a lot, but the information at hand was too compelling to ignore. With my hands quaking, I pulled out my phone and took photos of the screen. If I wanted to know what Jared was up to, how I was going to obtain that information, I needed proof. I acted as the model employee over the following few days while quietly probing Jared's activities. Late in the day, I searched his office or examined company files. With each new revelation I uncovered, it became increasingly apparent that Jared was running a sophisticated scheme to launder money with shell corporations and offshore accounts. He was abusing his power to trade on the stock market, pay off politicians, and build an empire that was completely invisible to the government. If anyone knew something about the game that Jared was playing, it could get dangerous. On my end, I was at risk of some real trouble. However, ignoring it was not an option. Intentionally or not, Jared was breaking the law, while simultaneously putting everyone who worked for him in danger. The collapse of his operation had the potential of taking down the entire company, alongside the innocent employees who didn't have even the slightest clue about the internal workings of the firm. You might not be able to access these captivating stories in the future if you do not subscribe to our channel. On the other hand, if you're subscribed, sit back and enjoy knowing that you can listen to these stories at any time you want. My investigation stepped up during a night when the entire office was empty and everyone had left to go home. Taking into account how sensitive the information was, I knew Jared stored it on his laptop and his office was where he kept it. While he was in the office, I paid attention to how repeatedly he entered the password. It was a good habit to have picked up. It felt like a long shot, but I decided to give it a go. Fear and adrenaline coursed through my body as I stealthily went into his office. As I switched on the laptop, I entered the password, and to my surprise, it worked. I had access. My worst fears were substantiated the second I looked at the laptop. Jared had meticulous files of his illegal ventures, such as assets, deals, communication with fraudulent business people, and other evidence that exposed him for market manipulation. There were even documents that contained names of people whom he directly compensated to remain mute, including police officers and politicians. It was an enormous convoluted system of betrayal and crime. My heart raced, and my palms became clammy as I tried to transfer everything I could onto my USB drive. This was the moment I had been waiting for to reveal Jared's true self to the world. Just as I heard a noise outside, my heart stopped. In a panic, I quickly dragged the USB drive out, and, as the door swung open, shoved it into my pocket. "Why were you sitting behind my desk, Natalie?" he asked as he walked in and narrowed his eyes. I gulped, trying to think of an excuse as I reached for my voice. "Well, I was trying to search for the files pertaining to the quarterly report." I attempted to explain calmly. "I believe they could be on your laptop." He held my gaze for an extended moment, and his face did not give anything away. "You could have just asked," he responded. His voice was soft. "No need for such stealthy tactics." He smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It looked as if it was stuck at the corners of his lips. I laughed anxiously. "Right, sorry about that. I'll just leave." I began to walk away, but he stood in front of me. "You have been very inquisitive of late," he stated, staring directly at me. Too inquisitive. Panic washed over me. How did he know? He knew far too much about my nosiness for comfort. I clenched my jaw, attempting to control my breathing as I responded. "I am simply doing my job." My tone was trembling. "You asked for the reports, so this is me making sure everything is in order." In front of me, he stayed silent for an utterly painful long time while glancing at my face before moving aside. "Of course," he replied. His tone was cold. "However, do take heed, Natalie. There are other things one should just not get involved with." Hurriedly and without turning back, I grabbed the door and dashed out of his office, my heart racing. Once I was in the corridor, I dashed to my desk, picked up my belongings, and exited the school premises. I had to leave the building to figure out my next step. I had captured the relevant data, but I had also given away some information about my strategy. Jared was aware that I was chasing him, which made everything much more complicated. Once at home, I copied the files from the USB to several other devices to make sure I would not lose anything, just in case. Then I contacted someone from my network, Rachel, an investigative journalist I met during my last employment. She had a track record of exposure of wrongdoing and annihilating high-profile people. If anyone could assist me in dealing with Jared, it was surely her. The next morning, Rachel was ready to meet me at the quiet cafe. I gave her the USB and explained things I had discovered. She paid a lot of attention to everything I said, cross-examining the claims I made regarding the whole scope of operations Jared had worked on. She spoke in an eager yet worried tone. "This is huge. If this is as hard as it seems, it could ruin his entire empire. But you should be cautious. Individuals like Jared don't lose easily." "I understand," I said with a heavy voice. "Why do bad people like him go unchallenged? He is working the system for his own gain and endangering many people in the process. I cannot afford to do nothing anymore." Him was correct. I had to stop him. Jared was exploiting everyone, along with the system, for their own personal goals, and I needed to take action. I was about to take down a highly successful business tycoon, and I knew this was not going to go easily. The thought of Jared knowing I am the reason for his downfall gives me chills, but how bad could it actually get? Days that followed felt a lot more nerve-wracking than usual. I continued to show up to my job day in and day out like nothing was wrong. I was aware that Jared was tracking me, waiting for the ideal opportunity to pounce on me. He was outwardly calm, but I could see that there was rage bubbling underneath him. He was expecting something. He just didn't know what exactly. Rachel, on the other hand, was making quick progress. She began dissecting the additional evidence I gave her. She compared the information to Jared's public records, sought out additional witnesses, and subsequently understood the scale of his illegal actions. It was beyond massive. Fraud, money laundering, and corruption that reached into the highest levels of both the corporate and political world compounded the issue. It was the type of story that could destroy lives and end reputations. Finally, one evening, just as Rachel was looking to publish the story, I got a call from Jared. When I saw his name on my phone, I felt panic. I answered the call and spoke. "Hello?" "Natalie," he said, his voice icy. "We need to talk. Now." I was aware of this course of action. It was clear he had also found out that I had uncovered his secrets. The consequences were inevitable. "Where?" is all I asked. He told me, "My office," adding, "Be here in 15 minutes. My palms turned clammy as I hung up. I didn't know what he was planning, but I had to concede throat. Grabbing my bag, I made sure Rachel had a copy of everything before making my way to the office. When I eventually made it to the office, I saw Jared sitting behind the desk, his face masking his fury. "Shut the door," he gently requested. I shut the door, completely out of breath with my heart now racing. "From how you state things, I can ascertain the kind of work you are involved in," he said, sounding bitter and threatening. "The work is well understood by people. It is something that does not concern you, so try keeping out of it. You are infringing the law and jeopardizing people's lives for personal gain, which is illegal. I, and others, can tell that you are breaking the law. I said back regardless. That means there is something worrying me and others. His frustration reached boiling point, as could be seen from his expression. He was flaming with rage. You are talking nonsense, he huffed out. Just because you think you can re-enter my life whenever you like and try being a savior does not mean you have any clue as to what's really going on. And I have the knowledge of your fraudulent activities. Guess what? I have placed the burden of proof on your shoulders, I answered confidently while sustaining the stare. I know what I intend to do, and I intend on following it through. The look on his face was scary, but I burst with confidence. His hands were kept in rolls of fists, and his jaw tightened. After a few moments of silence, he made the final decision. Calmly, he took a breath and smiled, making the smile transition to a very sinister and cold smile which immediately brought chills down my spine. You think you've won? He said softly. You have no idea who you are about to deal with. Do you really think this ends with me? You're playing a game that you do not comprehend, Natalie. I am not playing, I said, cutting him off. This is over, Jared. He chuckled, the sound cruel and devoid of mirth. You're incredibly delusional, he retorted. You think that eliminating me will somehow make a difference? You're simply a sacrificial piece in a more complex game. Before I could articulate a response, the doors swung open and federal agents poured in, weapon drawn. Jared Collins, you are under arrest for numerous counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy, one of the agents stated. Jared's complexion was colorless and furious as they handcuffed Jared. He turned to me with a look that screamed hatred. You will regret this, he said through clenched teeth. You have no clue what you have unleashed. I sat in silence as they took him away, feeling sadness as well as relief and fear. The man I had loved once was no longer there. Only a criminal who had misused his power to insist and deceive remained. He had done this to himself, but in no way made the situation any less painful. The day after, Rachel had published the expose, and it instantly went viral in the media. Jared's empire turned to dust the very next day as his nefarious deeds were unveiled. The company was snatched up by the government, and its assets were frozen, and the reputation that once stood tall was completely battered. The aftermath of the incident was tremendously large, with everyone connected to his web of conspiracies facing an investigation. I left the company, preferring not to be associated with the madness that unfolded. I relocated to a different city to get away from the consequences of Jared's demise. It was a celebration that had a touch of sadness. While I felt like I achieved a lot, it was still painful because the man I loved is no longer there, and the legacy is now a reminder of greed and corruption. I learned that there are some people who wish to remain undiscovered, and that the people we think we know might have some nasty secrets. He was someone entirely different from who I imagined him to be, and it was truly a life built of deceit. But learning the value of standing up for the truth was certainly a lesson of grave importance. While doing so, it hurt to some extent. After all, my and Jared's decisions have collectively shaped to this result. And ultimately, the truth came out.